So as we've been discussing, risks have really been proliferating throughout the Middle East. We had that terrorist attack in Iran yesterday. We've had assassinations in Lebanon. We've, of course, had those Houthi attacks in the Red Sea, and the U.S. looking to escalate our response there. So joining us now to break down all of this, what it means, what it could mean, is Dr. Trita Parsi. He's, of course, Executive Vice President of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft and fantastic friend of the show. Great to see you, sir.
Great to see you. Happy New Year.
So you had an article that you just posted in The Nation. Let's put this up on the screen, talking about the risks here. You asked the question, will Israel drag the U.S. into another ruinous war? And lay out the case very clearly that, as the U.S. is trying to assemble this coalition to go after the Houthis and figure out how to respond in all these various ways, that Biden has blocked the most clear solution to all of these problems, which is to push for a ceasefire in Gaza.
Absolutely. I mean, we have 4 areas of potential escalation right now. The Lebanese-Israeli border, Iraq and Syria with the militias attacking U.S. troops, the Red Sea because of what the Houthis are doing, and then, of course, a potential direct confrontation between Iran and Israel, particularly if it emerges that the Israelis had a hand in those attacks yesterday, which, of course, at this point, we don't know. The U.S.'s approach, Biden's approach essentially has been to escalate in order to de-escalate, move more troops there, issue threats. There's now very clear threats to the Houthis that they will be attacked if there's an additional attack against the ships. On a very immediate level, perhaps one can say that is understandable. There needs to be a degree of deterrence. But at the same time, the easiest and fastest way of actually de-escalating the situation is a ceasefire. And we know that for certain because during the 6 days that there was a ceasefire, that's the 6 days in which the Iraqi militias completely ceased all attacks on U.S. troops. There were 6 attacks the day before the ceasefire. But for those 6 days, nothing. And then they issued warnings on the 6th day of the ceasefire and saying that they will resume attacks if Israel resumes bombing Gaza. Even when it comes to the Houthis, there was a significant reduction. So we know for certain that at least there's a very significant likelihood of that succeeding. But it appears to be the one option that the Biden administration is the least inclined to pursue, even though it seems to be the most effective.
Well, let's talk about the terrorist attack yesterday at the event commemorating Qasem Soleimani. And we actually have John Kirby here responding to questions. Matt Miller also made similar comments yesterday. Here's Kirby being asked about potential Israeli involvement in this attack.
We don't have any more detail in terms of how it happened or who might be responsible for it. On your second question, again, I would point you to our Israeli partners to talk more about this. We're again not in a position to confirm the specific reports. I would just tell you that al-Huri was a noted, designated global terrorist, and if he is in fact dead, nobody should be shedding a tear over his loss. We have no indication at this time at all that Israel was involved in any way whatsoever.
No indication, but just to be clear, you don't think, did they support or assist in some other way?
I'm not going to speak for another nation. I would just tell you that we have no indication that Israel was in any way involved in this.
So his first answer was about the assassination of al-Huri, and he says, well, talk to the Israelis about that. And then with the second one, he says, we have no indication that it was the Israelis. So there is a degree of difference in the kind of response there. So take them both. It's broadly assumed that Israel was responsible for the killing of the Hamas leader in Beirut, and Israel has made very little effort to deny that. When it comes to the attack in Iran, Israel does seem to be signaling to allies that they were not responsible. So why would they be responsible? Why was suspicion on them? And if it wasn't them, who would it have been and why?
I mean, the suspicion as to why it would be them is, of course, because of the context that we're in. We had the assassination of the Iranian general in Damascus just about a week ago. And then you had the assassination of the Hamas officials and others. So within this context—
And a Hezbollah official?
Hezbollah official yesterday as well. So given that context and on all of those others, there's clear-fingered indication that there was the Israelis. So it certainly raises suspicions. However, there's no evidence at this point. The evidence that some are putting forward that this is not the modus operandi of the Israelis, etc., I think that's a fair argument, but I think we should also recognize that things have changed after Gaza after the October 7th attacks, in which the Israelis themselves have said that previous red lines, previous operations, previous ways of doing things are no longer the case. So I think we need to keep that in mind. There is another possibility, of course, which is that it is the Iranian Mujahideen, the MEK, which is a terrorist organization, was on the EU's, on the US's terrorist list, got off that list during the Obama administration for political reasons because they were just buying off half of the city to lobby for them. They were used by the Israelis to conduct assassinations of Iranian scientists. And this was revealed by the Obama administration itself, that the Israelis were working with the MEK. And the Israelis have had a relationship with the MEK for quite some time. Their modus operandi would very much be to do an attack of this kind. So it could also be that it is the MEK potentially with some Israeli dimension.
What about ISIS or
it could be ISIS.
Sunni element?
Yeah, so ISIS in Afghanistan, the Khorasan province, they have attacked Iran just in the last 3 years more than 3-4 times. Some of those attacks quite bloody. Nothing like this, of course. And there is definitely a likelihood that it could be them as well.
Do
it would raise a lot.
Take credit for those attacks? Then?
They do, and on Twitter there were accounts taking credit for it, but not by the official sources there. But it's also a very interesting question that will be raised if this was ISIS. There's already all kinds of conspiracy theories in the region asking the question, why did ISIS never attack Israel during all of the period that it was active? And it would raise additional questions. During this war in Gaza, they have done nothing. They've said nothing about the war in Gaza, but then they take the opportunity to attack Iran. So it doesn't necessarily mean anything, but it will just add fuel to some of the speculation about all of this.
So why would Israel potentially want war with Iran? Because I think that would be the other pushback, is like, this would be obviously incredibly escalatory. This would be inviting a direct confrontation if Israel did have some hand in this terrorist attack. So what would be the potential logic behind it?
So that's the question I'm perplexed by, mindful of the fact that for 20 years, the Israelis have done everything they can to get the U.S. to go into war with Iran. And just remember what happened a couple of years ago when Netanyahu was pressing Donald Trump to attack Iran after the U.S. elections when Trump had lost. And Trump thought that perhaps by starting a war, he would be able to overturn the elections. And he was pushed by Netanyahu to do so, and there were counter pressure from Milley, etc. The Israelis have tried to get the United States to go to war with Iran for more than 20 years. They've been pushed back by previous presidents. Even Trump pushed back prior to that specific incident. And he actually told the Israelis, if you think this is a good idea, you should go ahead and do it on your own. And did not want to have part of it. Obama pushed back against this. Now the Israelis find themselves with the most deferential president that I can remember when it comes to Israeli military strategies and objectives. And they may just believe that this is the one opportunity they have waited for. Netanyahu in particular, who was in charge back then when they were trying to start a war with Iran. And the way the Israelis wanted to start a war is that they would do something, but they would drag the U.S. into it. Given how Biden has gone along with almost everything Israel has done right now, it wouldn't be inconceivable that the Israelis would think that this is the best opportunity they have yet. Is it evidence that they were behind it? No. But as to the question, is there a potential motive? Clearly there is.
But to set aside the attack inside Iran, you still have the Hezbollah assassination, the Iranian IRGC general in Syria getting assassinated, and then also then the Hamas official in Beirut. So there's clear evidence that they're certainly not opposed to an escalation. So let's say that they get what they want, that they get the escalation, that now there's a direct confrontation. Do you think that they're correct that the U.S. goes along with them?
Depends on how it happens. I think if you have assassinations that then begets a strong response by Hezbollah or by Iran with another attack on Israel with a lot of civilian deaths, then I think once again you would find Biden in a situation that he would strongly support the Israeli war effort, which originally, at least initially, will be military support, other types of support. The question is, will it eventually drag the U.S. into the war itself? Because once that happens, I mean, already the U.S. is very much, I mean, all the weapons that are being used in Gaza essentially are American weapons. But once that happens, you're going to have additional escalation risks because you already have all of these attacks on U.S. troops and bases by Iraqi and Syrian militias. At one point, one of them will be successful in that scenario. At that point, the U.S. will respond. I mean, the attack—
They injured somebody pretty recently, right?
Exactly. Just yesterday or a couple of hours ago, there was one in Iraq, and the Iraqis are pointing the finger either at the U.S. or at Israel. Next time when some American soldiers are dead, the U.S. is going to respond even stronger, and it's just going to escalate further. I think we should remember one thing. We've been lucky that it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, that's
On
true.
October 26th, there was an attack by an Iraqi militia against the Erbil base in northern Iraq. It managed to get through all of the American air defenses, 5 a.m. in the morning. It hit the barracks on the second floor where American soldiers were sleeping. By pure luck, the explosives did not work and the drone did not explode. Had it exploded, the U.S. most likely would have retaliated very strongly, killed a very large number of militiamen, which would probably have begotten another response by them, and we would be at war.
And we all know the way that the media pushes. We already see the voices, hawkish voices, both on the right and in the Democratic Party pushing in this direction. I also wanted to get your reaction to some news that's developing with regard to the Houthis. Put this up on the screen from the Wall Street Journal. This is A9, guys. U.S. allies give Houthis ultimatum, stop ship attacks or face consequences. This report says that U.S., Britain, and key allies issued what officials described as a final warning to the Houthi Yemeni rebel group Wednesday to cease its attacks on international shipping in the Red Sea or bear the consequences. They go on to say that the U.S. military has prepared options to strike the Iran-backed rebel group, according to U.S. officials. What are the risks attendant to this strategy?
Massive risk. I think, first of all, I think it's important to keep in mind this is the UK and the US. Major other countries, France, Italy, Spain, have pulled out of this coalition precisely because of a desire not to get dragged into war. I think some of them were also fearing that they were used as bait.
Looks like Bahrain is the only Middle Eastern
Mighty
country.
Bahrain is in it. So that tells you something. Incidentally,
Micronesia took a pass.
Yeah. And
They got our back elsewhere, though, don't worry.
This is supposed to be a neighborhood watch, watching the neighborhood, and the neighborhood is the Red Sea. There's no countries from the neighborhood in the neighborhood watch, right?
Yeah.
So, but the escalation risk is there very significant. The Houthis have capabilities, ballistic missiles, etc. And one of the things that they might do, which would be very dangerous, and it would also be destabilizing for the region as a whole, they may start targeting the UAE and Saudi Arabia as a way of pressuring the US. That could potentially then cause a breakdown of the Iranian-Saudi normalization, which actually has helped stabilize a lot of different areas in the region right now. If that falls apart, we might be in a much, much worse situation than we're right now. So this is, and that's beyond the escalation risk of the US getting further dragged into the war, of course. This is, again, very dangerous, and it goes back to what we talked about earlier on. There is a much safer, faster, more effective way of preventing this escalation.
Right,
and that is actually to have a ceasefire in Gaza. And let me just add one point on that.
Yeah.
It raises the question again and again, what is it? What is the U.S. interest in continued bombardment of Gaza that is of such value that Biden is willing to risk all of these escalatory cycles? And on top of that, according to the Democrats themselves, they say that the elections in this year is going to be about the survival of American democracy. And the polls clearly show that Biden is destroying his winning coalition, particularly because of how he's pushing away the Gen Z. So he's not only risking his re-election, he's not only risking war, according to him himself, he's also risking American democracy. For what? What is the American interest in continued bombardment in Gaza that makes all of this worthwhile?
Well, that's actually what I wanted to ask you, because it's also in contradiction with the reports of Biden's own strategy. You keep hearing that Blinken and Biden and others are telling them, by the new year, this has got to be done. Like, you don't. What did Blinken say? You don't have that much runway. Like, you don't have that much credit. I think. Yeah. Like, because when they said they wanted to go for months, it has to be over by now. So even they think this needs to end. They have the power to end it. It is causing all of these risks to everything that they stand for, yet they're carrying on simply so that starvation and bombing can continue. And to what end? Do you have an answer to that question? Or
I don't. The only thing I think we can say is that earlier assessments, which treated Biden as if he was not entirely on board with the Israeli strategy, but he was trying to build credibility with them with a bear hug, or show support so that he at some point could be able to rein them back. I just don't think that has proven to be true, because it seems much more likely that he actually signed on to the Israeli objective of the elimination of Hamas. He wanted to see Israel do to Hamas what the United States could not do to the Taliban. Knowing the lessons from that lesson, the lessons from that story, he nevertheless supported this. And I think that much better explains why he's been so obstinate about preventing a ceasefire and thinking that he's actually still building up cachet and credibility to at one point later on push for it.
Yeah, at this point you have to view that as absurd. I mean, it seems to me as almost just like purely ideological and not based on a current analysis of American interests, let alone humanitarianism. On that last point that you both referred to, there is this argument out there of like, oh, you all act like the U.S. could just push a button, this would all be over, and really they're their own country, and even if we were opposed to it, they would continue and do what they want to do. What is your response to that? Does the U.S. really have significant leverage in this situation?
Of course it does. It's an absurd notion to say that the U.S. doesn't. I mean, we have that Israeli major general who just admitted it last month, saying that all these weapons are coming from the U.S. If the U.S. cuts off the tap, we can't fight, period. So it's very clear. I mean, Biden has shipped 10,000 tons of weapons and ammunition to Israel since the beginning of this war. The Israelis need this to continue, particularly mindful of the pace and quantity of bombardments that they're raining down on Gaza, which far exceeds what the U.S. did in Mosul, for instance, against ISIS. But he also raises the other question. If it is so, let's assume for a second that the United States doesn't have that leverage. Okay, then why are we sending these weapons? You can say that the U.S. doesn't have the leverage to stop it. Why are we fueling it? Answer that question then. If it is so that we cannot stop it, fine, perhaps we can't. But why are we fueling it? Why are we sending more weapons in that case? That's the question that is not being answered.
Yeah.
Last question for me. Hassan Nasrallah's speech yesterday, leader of Hezbollah, what did you take away from that?
I think that speech again showed that there is no desire either in Iran or in Hezbollah to actually have open warfare. There is clearly war going on between these different sides, but open warfare in which the Israelis would completely invade Lebanon, the Lebanese would use all of their resources and assets against Israel, potentially dragging in the U.S., is not something that they believe is beneficial to them for a variety of reasons. It's not just because they're weaker militarily, it's also what would it do inside of Lebanon because of its dynamics. The same thing is happening on the Iranian side. Lebanon's or Hezbollah's red line is that essentially an invasion is their red line. That's how they would get involved in a war. Same thing is coming on the Iranian side. They're saying that unless there's an attack on Iranian soil, Iran will stay out of the war. Now, whether that terrorist attack qualifies as that, there's a gray area there. It depends on how it is being interpreted. But I think from the very beginning, it's been clear they're not looking for that open type of a confrontation. They're looking for a more indirect, asymmetric way of conducting this war.
Dr. Parsi, thank you so much for spending some time with us this morning. It's truly invaluable.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great to see you.
Good to see you.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.